How we doing? How we doing? This is Destination Denver, Colorado, and I've got a great one for you today. Because after all, if you're thinking about moving to Denver, you have to consider what are the worst places to live around Denver. Let's find out. Alright, this is Destination Denver, Colorado. I am your host, Jimmy Everetts, and listen, if you're interested in learning all the pros and cons, ins and outs to moving to or around Denver, Colorado, then this is the channel for you. So that subscribe button and notification icon down below, make sure you're clicking that as I'm dropping new videos for you each and every week. Alright, now that we have that fun-filled stuff out of the way, let's get to what we're really here for, and that is, what are the worst places to live around Denver, Colorado? Now listen, while we're having this conversation, I'm going to base it off of a few things. Obviously a bit of research, talking to a lot of my clients, talking to a lot of people who live around the area. But the fact is, this isn't these specific neighborhoods are bad and these specific neighborhoods are good, right? We're going to get really into what kind of person you are. But let's just take the overall concept. If you get on Google right now and you type in what are the worst places to live in a given area, the first thing that it's going to come up with, right or wrong, is crime stats. And listen, I understand that when you move somewhere, when you think about moving somewhere, crime is going to be a factor that may influence your decision, especially as crime rates increase. But we need to take that into perspective. So when you think about crime rates are going to affect, normally, higher populated, more densely populated areas. So when you look at Denver, if we just statistically take a peek and we do crime stats in Denver, it's gonna bring up neighborhoods like Cap Hill and City Park and 5 Points or Rhino. It's gonna bring up parts of Aurora. Well, those are some of the neighborhoods that are some of the most popular places to live right now. Cap Hill, Rhino, I mean, these are places that people are flocking to and really enjoying. They just happen to be high in population and very dense. So naturally, you're gonna tend to see crime rates being higher statistically in those areas. Now, to give you a little perspective on that, if we were gonna talk about the #1 location for crime in Denver that you wouldn't wanna live in apparently, it would be Denver International Airport. The neighborhood around DIA has the #1 highest crime rate as far as Denver goes. So take crime rate for what it is. Certainly it's important, but it's also taking it into perspective, unless of course you want to move to Denver International Airport. I mean, after all, your flights would get off on time. All right, so let's take it really from who you are. What are you looking for? So we're gonna talk lifestyle. And #1 lifestyle, if you're thinking about moving to Colorado, a lot of people are going to talk about outdoors, mountains, hiking, getting up into the foothills. So I think it's pretty easy to figure out that if you're moving to Denver and you want to be into the mountains all the time, you want to get up skiing and hiking and all of those things, then chances are living on the east side of Denver or the east side of I-25 isn't going to be ideal for you. There are certain areas as you get farther east into Aurora, Central Park, what have you, where you get farther and farther away from the foothills, not just geographically, but how easily you have access to them. There are certain parts of the state where you jump on a highway and no matter what, 20, 25 minutes later, you're into the mountains. But there are certain pockets of Aurora where you're going to drive an hour or more in order to get to the mountains just because you have to get around to a highway to get up there. Now, that's not to say that if you live, again, on the east side of Denver that there's nothing to do outdoors. The east side of Denver has two of the bigger water areas, Cherry Creek Reservoir and Aurora Reservoir. It has a ton of walking trails. So there's that balance. If you're into water more than anything, you might be on the east side of Denver, but if you're a big mountain person, no. Living on the east side of Denver is probably not the ideal neighborhood for you. Now, let's say you're looking for areas that have a ton of walkability. You like to be able to walk to the coffee shop, walk to the store, walk to your restaurants. Well, if you go now to the west side of Denver, you're gonna move into a lot of older communities, Arvada, Lakewood, Wheat Ridge, Golden to some extent, down into Littleton as well. These are neighborhoods that were built decades ago, I hate to make myself sound old, but they were built a few years before I was born. And so in these neighborhoods, they weren't really thought about from a walkability standpoint. Gas was cheap back then, so you got in your car, you drove everywhere you need to be. So a lot of these communities on the west side of Denver, in the western suburbs, you're not going to see a ton of walkability. Now, let me add to this, kind of referring back to that crime stat in the beginning. I think there is a difference between the idea of walkability from a safety standpoint and walkability from going to restaurants. When I talk to my clients, they love the western slope for its walkability. They love how the mountains shield them from the wind. They love the fact that a lot of those suburbs you can walk any time of day and you don't have anything to worry about. But you're also, in most of those communities, you're not in a place where you're going to walk to something that you want to do. Unless you're in a specific community, you're not walking to your coffee shop, you're not walking to a restaurant, and you're most certainly not walking to the store. Of course, I don't know how many people are walking to the store and carrying groceries home. That's some old school, but what do I know? Now, let's say that you want to move into a house that has kind of, the detached property. You're not into townhomes, you're not into condos, but you want a good sized yard and you want mature trees. Well, kind of same thing when you start talking about different communities. West side of town doesn't have that walkability, but those communities, they were built years and years ago. So a lot of those communities, a lot of those homes, they're older, the trees are mature, the lot sizes are big because they didn't try to squeeze a lot into a small area. Whereas if you start looking on east, a little bit of north, a little bit of south, but you go to some of these newer communities. You look out in Aurora, places like Talon's Reach, get into Littleton, Sterling Ranch, parts of Roxborough. You get up north and we start talking about Commerce City. You start talking about Central Park. A lot of these neighborhoods are brand new. The houses are nice, townhomes, condos, what have you. But the houses, you get a lot of cookie cutter. You get a lot of yards where you can literally reach out a window and touch your neighbor's house. You obviously don't have mature trees or mature growth and landscaping because the homes and the land itself hasn't been around for very long. Shouldn't say the land, but obviously the landscaping hasn't been around for very long. So as you're looking for communities in which you have that, big lot sizes, those mature trees that are going to tower over your house because you have kids that will rake your yard for you, I hope, then chances are you're going to be looking western side of town, and you're going to be looking for older neighborhoods. You're going to be avoiding some of those newer communities that you might see popping up all over the place on the eastern, north, and admittedly south side of Denver. And listen, I get, some of this is going to be very common sense, but I talk to my clients, like, what are the worst places if you want, kind of peace and quiet? You want laid back? Well, obviously, if you want some peace and quiet, you want some more laid back, easy to park, you want to be as far out of the city as you can. When you get into communities like lower downtown Denver, Five Points or Rhino, River North, whatever you're going to call it today. You get into communities like the Highlands, Sloan's Lake, parts of Sunnyside. These are areas that you're starting downtown, you're starting to get to the outstretch or just the outskirts of downtown, but you still have that vibe. So you still have a healthy nightlife. You still have people going, around at all times of day. There's still going to be times if you're living in a home with street parking in those communities, there's going to be times where you're going to have to circle the block a few times. So if you're looking for kind of the more laid back, that's where, as you would expect in any community, being close to the city is the worst place you could possibly live, and you're going to start wanting to get farther and farther into the suburbs. One thing that makes Denver really great is this idea that you can get into the suburbs pretty quickly. So as you get out of downtown Denver, it takes you maybe 10-15 minutes and you're into these communities where, again, things start to shut down a little quiet, a little earlier. You don't have to worry about a lot of noise. You don't have to worry about a lot of parking, but something to consider. If you don't want any of those things, then you need to be as far outside of the city of Denver as reasonably possible. I would imagine all of this should be making sense, but at the end of the day, I'm here to help. Now, this is when I was talking to clients and we were talking about commuting. This was a hot topic. So let's say that you're not into a long drive. You want to be pretty close to where you're working. Well, again, it's going to be obvious geographically. You're going to look and you're going to see communities like south of Denver, you have Castle Rock. north of Denver, you have Longmont, you have Brighton, you have Boulder to an extent. Now, at any given time of day, these communities could be caught 40 minutes to an hour away from downtown Denver. So yes, it's going to be obvious that those are going to be the worst places to live if you're working in downtown Denver. However, I would also add that, so let's say that you're living in Castle Rock, which is about 40 minutes with no traffic, 40 minutes south of Denver. However, let's say that you work in Greenwood Village or DTC, Denver Tech Center, which is South Denver. Well, the Tech Center is only about 20 minutes from Castle Rock. So Castle Rock would be one of the worst places that you could live if you don't like commuting, you don't like driving, and you work on the north side of Denver. But if you work in the Tech Center, it's a 20-minute drive, not as bad. Very similar situation with Longmont and Brighton up north. If you're working on the north side of Denver, not going to be as bad. Now, I will say traffic coming from north into Denver South can get a little more hectic than if you're coming up from Castle Rock. At the same time, don't let geography fool you. If you look on a map and you see Boulder and Golden, they look like they have a little bit of distance from each other, but it's a little windy road through the mountains, and you can be from one to the other in 20 minutes. So when we say Boulder's a long ways away, a lot of times folks working in Golden will find Boulder or vice versa as a great place to live. That's a random fun fact. I don't even know if it's useful in this video, but I'm throwing it in there because I love Boulder and I love Golden. And it leads me to the fact that if you don't like hugging trees or politics, then Boulder's probably the worst place for you. Okay, I'm just kidding. I tease Boulder a little bit, but that's what it's kind of known for. Hugging some trees, being a little kooky as far as their politics, but a great town. So listen, as you're thinking about moving to Denver, obviously there are a lot of different things, different aspects that are going to lead to a neighborhood being the best or worst for you. This is what I would suggest, and this is what most of my clients have told me they did. Spend some time driving around the different neighborhoods. Get a vibe for it. Drive through it at different times of day, especially as you start to narrow down that search. Really spend some time around that community. Different times of day, different days of the week. Really get a vibe for it. Make the drive from that community to where you're going to work, because obviously if you're a remote worker, completely different conversation. But if you're trying to go across town and you're going across town in peak hours as opposed to off-peak hours, completely different. Yes, you're going to keep an eye on crime rates, especially if it's significant. Yes, you're going to keep an eye on schools and different school districts and how they rate if you have children. Now, I will add a little fact for people who do not have kids. You may not consider schools when you're looking to buy a home. However, I'll always encourage you to keep schools on your mind, because if you're going to buy a house, at some point you go to resell it, school districts, what schools kids can go to in that area can play a huge part in your property value. So again, just something to keep in mind. I love throwing out little random fun facts. What can I tell you? And I did want to add that as you're doing your research and you start to look at different communities, and especially if you're looking at what are the worst places, what are the places that aren't going to fit me, take some of the input with a grain of salt. I'm going to give you a perfect example. As I was talking to some clients and leading up to making this video and talking to some friends as well, I also did my quick Google search, right? Worst places. And naturally, again, crime comes up very high. But I also wanted to just get some input. And so I get on Reddit, I go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and one of my favorite comments was a woman talking about, if you don't want to get shot, don't go to Highlands Ranch or Littleton. And if you don't want to get robbed, don't go to Lakewood. Now, I've lived in Lakewood the majority of my life. There are certain areas of Lakewood where, again, statistically crimes are pretty high, but I would never think don't go to Lakewood or you'll get robbed. And to say don't go to Highlands Ranch or you'll get shot, Highlands Ranch is one of the most affluent, old school, popular since the mid-90s neighborhoods you could possibly find. So the idea that someone would say don't go to Highlands Ranch or you'll get shot is just kind of absurd. So take what you're seeing on the internet and take what you're seeing that people have to say for a grain of salt. And that includes even me, because at the end of the day, a lot of what I'm telling you is opinion and those of my friends and colleagues. So listen, while you're trying to narrow down what are the worst places, what are the best places for you, I'm always available to answer any of those questions. So the number and email popping up below, I'm always the person answering your phone calls, answering your texts, answering your emails. There, when and if you need me. So listen, as you're trying to narrow down places and figure out what's worst, what's best for you, I'm always available. The number and email popping up below. I'm always the person answering your phone calls, answering your texts, answering emails. This is Destination Denver, Colorado. I am your host, Jimmy Everetts. This was the worst places to live around Denver, Colorado. Until next time, peace.